A bond was supposed to be a promise that power could be shared without theft, that two wolves could stand in the same storm and come out warmer, not wounded. Vivienne had grown up on that creed the way other girls grew up on lullabies, repeating it as law, as comfort, as the only future that made the bruises of training and politics worth enduring. Yet on her wedding night, beneath carved cedar beams and moon-silver drapery, she learned how quickly a sacred vow could be turned into a verdict. Hope had been dressed in white linen and gold thread. Reality wore the face of a man stepping back from her as if she carried plague. The bridal chamber doors stood open, not closed, and that was the first wrongness she registered through the pounding in her ears. Elders had no reason to witness a consummation unless they expected spectacle, and spectacle had always fed Ironhold's hunger better than mercy. Her groom, Cassian Vale, still wore his ceremonial mantle, wolf fur clasped at one shoulder, the Ironhold sigil bright against his chest. He did not touch her. He did not even meet her gaze for long. He looked past her, to the council, and said, "I refuse this union." The words struck with bizarre clarity, every consonant clean as glass. Vivienne stood very still because stillness had once saved her from worse humiliations. Her wedding linen clung damply to her spine where fever sweat had already begun. The bond sign beneath her left collarbone, a crescent web of silver lines that had appeared at moonrise, burned with alternating cold and heat until her breath came shallow. "State your grounds," Elder Marrow said, formal, bored. Cassian finally faced her. "She is death-marked. Any wolf tied to her will wither. I will not take a Luna who buries the line." A murmur moved through the room like dry leaves dragged over stone. Vivienne heard one of the matrons hiss softly, not with pity, with satisfaction. She had spent 10 years serving this pack through winter famine, wound healing, and treaty records. It took one phrase to erase all of it. She spoke before terror could close her throat. "You felt the bond spark at the circle. You told me you did." His jaw tightened. "I felt pressure. Not bond. Whatever tied itself to you was wrong." The second wrongness came as pain. Not from him. From inside. A twisting flare under her ribs as if the sign were trying to root through bone. Her knees threatened to fold. She locked them anyway. "I stay upright. I stay quiet. If I plead, they call it guilt. If I scream, they call it madness. I know what this is, and I know what it is not. The pattern is unstable, yes, but not cursed. The fever cycle follows lunar pressure and stress response. I documented this in 3 case notes, and Corvus stole 2 of them. I am not poison. I am not poison. I am not what they need me to be, so their fear can wear a crown." Before she could say another word, the chamber doors opened wider and Corvus Ashford entered with a rolled packet of wax-sealed parchment in his hands. Her cousin. Her childhood ally once, before ambition sharpened him into something narrow and metallic. He bowed with polished grief that never reached his eyes. "I arrived as soon as the archive runner found me," he said. "I prayed this rumor was false." He handed the packet to Elder Marrow, who broke the seals and scanned quickly, then slower, expression tightening into theatrical horror. "Testimony from 3 border healers," the elder announced. Each reports accelerated decline in wolves previously linked to similar marks. Organ failure, madness, death. Vivienne stared at the wax. Wrong crest impression on one seal, too shallow. The script on the second page slanted left, despite claiming to be Master Healer Tamsin, who wrote right-leaning loops all her life. Forged. Sloppy for anyone who knew what to look for. Useless in a room that had already chosen its truth. "Those are counterfeit," she said. "Give me 1 hour with the archive logs and I can prove it." Corvus did not even glance at the pages. He looked at her with a cousin's sadness so convincing it almost felt kind. "Vivienne, if there is even a chance this mark spreads through mating or pack link, We cannot gamble with children and heirs. Not now. The word children landed like a blade turned slowly. Not because she had any, but because the room always measured her by the offspring she had not yet conceived. Elder Marrow rose. For the good of blood and throne, Vivian Ironhold is stripped of crest and standing, exile at first light. She may carry no documents, no blades, no claimstones. She does not return. Cassian exhaled, a faint sound of relief he failed to hide. Vivienne turned to him one final time. Was any part of this yours? She asked, quiet enough that only the front line heard. Or did you sell me before sunset? He looked away first. Do not make this uglier. Corvus stepped close enough for only her to hear. Take the mercy, cousin. Some marks end at exile, others end on a pyre. By dawn, the wedding chambers smelled of extinguished candles and wet wool. Servants removed her iron-hold chain while 2 guards waited at the threshold. The chain had belonged to her mother. When it came away, skin at her throat lifted with it where fever-swollen tissue had stuck to the metal. She did not cry. Grief felt too expensive. They gave her no cloak. The storm gave her no reprieve. Moonlight shattered through clouds and rain in alternating sheets as she was marched down the eastern road in bridal linen already mud-streaked to the knee. Thunder rolled over the mountain ridges, and each low boom made the sign under her collarbone pulse harder, syncopated, malignant. 3 miles from the gate, at the split where one path led to the market valley and one to the border ravine, the younger guard slowed. His name was Wren, barely 20, kind once when she splinted his sister's arm. Please, he whispered without looking at her, do not turn back tonight. They posted archers. Vivian frowned through rain. Exile means out. Why archers? The older guard answered flatly. Orders changed. From whom? He did not answer. Wren did, voice shaking. From Ashford. A cold more honest than storm water passed through her. Corvus had argued for exile in public, then arranged a death in private, clean and deniable. Found at the ravine edge. Bond-mad woman wandered. Tragic end. The older guard seized her elbow to push her toward the ravine path. She twisted free by instinct, years of training surfacing through exhaustion, and his fingers closed on wet linen instead of skin. Wren grabbed for her too, but weakly, more warning than capture. Run west, he said under his breath. Do not stop at the watchfires. She ran. Rain blinded at once. The road dissolved into shale, roots, and slick grass as she cut across the slope toward forbidden ground, Starfall territory beyond the black pines. Behind her, one shout, then another. No arrow struck, though she heard a bowstring sing once in the dark. Either Wren lied to spare her panic, or someone at the back line chose not to kill an unarmed woman in a torn wedding dress. She did not look back to learn which. The bond sign became a live wire under her skin. Pain threaded from sternum to throat, then down both arms, making her fingers cramp. She stumbled against a fallen trunk, tasted copper, pushed up again. Wind carried wet earth, pine sap, and the distant mineral scent of riverstone. Somewhere to her left wolves called, not hunting cries, not welcome either. A territorial warning stretched thin by storm. By the second hour after dawn should have broken, the sky remained iron dark. Moonstorm, the old healers called this weather, when lunar pull and mountain pressure made even steady wolves restless. Vivian felt it in her marrow, felt it in the unstable rhythm thrashing beneath her ribs. I can keep moving. 10 steps, then 10 more. I have crossed fever before. I have reset dislocations with shaking hands. I know pain without surrender. But this is different. This is a current trying to split me open from the inside, and if I collapse in Ironhold Range, Corvus gets his story. If I collapse in the wild, Carrion gets my bones. If I make Starfall alive, maybe I get a hearing. Maybe I get a A cell is still a future. By late morning, the border stones appeared between trees, carved with the starfall crescent over a field of etched stars. Relief came so hard it almost dropped her. She crossed on unsteady legs, expecting horns, patrols, capture. None came. What rose instead was a fortress wall through rain haze, basalt black and silver veined, built into the mountain like a second cliff. Torches burned blue along the gate towers despite the storm, proof of old kingcraft and deeper power than Ironhold had admitted in decades. Vivienne reached the outer steps, slipped, caught herself on both hands. The world tilted. Then scent hit. Not rain, not pine, not blood. A silver-bright fissure of mate scent broke open in the air, clean and devastating, as if lightning had found a shape and called it hers. Bone-deep cold swept her first, then a fierce spiral of heat climbed from ribs to throat, pulling a strangled sound from her chest. Her instincts went rigid, torn between kneeling and fleeing. The gate thundered open. A tall man in dark battlecloth strode through rain without flinching, flanked by guards who stopped several paces behind him as if an invisible boundary had dropped. His hair was storm black at the roots, silver at the temples, and old rune scars banded both forearms. When his gaze locked on her, amber bled through his irises, predator and sovereign in one breath. For the first instant, power radiated from him like drawn steel. For the second, he looked afraid. Vivienne knew the face from treaty carvings and whispered warnings spoken by rivals who pretended they did not fear him. Theron Starfall, the cold alpha king who had never taken a mate. The bond inside her detonated into pain so sharp it erased distance. She pitched forward on the fortress steps, rain in her mouth, stone against her cheek, and heard his boots strike beside her just before darkness surged up and took her whole. Darkness did not hold cleanly. It split at the edges, letting rain and sound leak through in shards. Vivienne surfaced to cold stone under her cheek, and the iron taste of storm water running over her lips. Voices moved above her, muffled by the pounding in her skull. Back from the line, all of you. Alpha, she crossed from Ironhold. I know where she crossed. Boots scraped, metal clicked. A growl answered from somewhere deeper in the courtyard, not quite wolf, not quite man. She forced one eye open and found the world tilted sideways. Black basalt walls veined in silver, blue torches fighting the rain, armored figures holding a perimeter they did not dare break. At the center of all of it stood Theron Starfall. One hand flexed at his side, as if he were resisting the urge to reach for her and break something at the same time. She tried to push up. Her arms shook and failed. Do not move, he said. The command carried no shout, yet every other voice stopped. Fear came back faster than strength. Ironhold had taught her what happened to women brought before power in weakened bodies. She dragged in one ragged breath and scraped her palms against the stone, trying to crawl backward, and pain detonated under her ribs hard enough to pull a cry from her throat. The mark beneath her collarbone blazed, then froze, then blazed again. She curled around it instinctively. Stay awake. Stay hostile. If you pass out again, you wake in chains. If you beg, they write your fear into law. You know this pattern. Men in rank cloth, silence thick as wool, one verdict waiting for your mouth to open so they can call it confession. Do not give them anything they can use. Not your tears, not your pulse, not your name unless you choose the shape of it. Theron crouched in front of her, rain coursing from his hair to his jaw, eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that felt less like inspection and more like impact. Up close, the rune scars on his forearms were not old battlefield trophies as the stories claimed. They were ritual lines, layered over years, each one precise and deliberate. A king's binding work. A king who had bled for his own crown more than once. Name, he said. voice lower now. She swallowed and tasted copper. Vivian Ironhold. The nearest guard made a sharp, involuntary sound at her house name. Theron did not look away from her. Who pursued you? Corvus Ashford. Saying it out loud made the betrayal feel newly raw. My escort had archers behind them. Exile was theater. A pause. Rain struck stone in hard, even beats. Did they mark you with poison? No. Her laugh came out thin and bitter. Only with lies. His gaze flicked once to the fever-bright web beneath her collarbone, then back to her eyes. That sign is destabilizing. How long since onset? She blinked, startled by the question's precision. Moonrise yesterday. One of his council wolves stepped forward, scent sharp with alarm. Alpha. If Ironhold branded her death-marked, we should isolate first and question second. Theron straightened without taking his attention from Vivienne. Authority dropped from him like a physical force, dense and undeniable. You will isolate your mouth, he said. No one touches her. No one scents her. No one speaks another word about brands in my courtyard. The wolf bent his head at once and retreated, trembling. Vivienne watched it happen and felt disorientation cut through the pain. He had defended her without knowing whether she was danger or trap. That was not mercy. Mercy implied distance. This felt like instinct colliding with decision and choosing neither half cleanly. Lightning opened the sky. For one white heartbeat, every carved line in the fortress gate lit like bone under skin. The bond between them surged in answer, a violent pull that made her stomach drop. Theron inhaled sharply, as if struck in the sternum, and amber flooded his irises so fast there was no human transition left to witness. His control slipped for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Vivienne felt the connection lock. Not imagined. Not fever delirium. A living thread, silver bright and mercilessly direct, from the center of her chest to his. Every warning she had ever heard about unstable bonds returned at once. Hemorrhage of life force, madness loops, organ collapse by dawn. She had memorized those outcomes in healer archives and pretended scholarship could blunt terror. Knowledge did nothing now. The current climbing her throat was too fierce, too intimate, too hungry to be dismissed as illness. She dragged herself onto one elbow and stared at him. No. His jaw tightened. No what? No bond. The words shook. Not this. Not with me. Wind drove rain between them in cold sheets. He stepped closer anyway. The instant he entered arm's reach, sensation slammed through her in contradictory waves. Bone-deep winter and then a heat that uncoiled from sternum to jaw, bright enough to blur the courtyard edges. Her instincts sharpened to a painful point. Every part of her registered him at once. Ozone, cedar smoke, wet leather, the metallic echo of old magic in his blood. Desire flared inside the terror so abruptly she almost hated herself for feeling it. Theron's pupils narrowed, predator surfacing under the man. He looked at her the way a starving wolf might look at fire. Need and caution, reverence and threat. When he spoke, the words were meant only for her. Look at me, Vivienne. She did. She could not do anything else. For Theron, the world narrowed to one kneeling woman in torn wedding linen, rain-slick and shaking and branded by a mark that should not have existed in his lifetime. He had stood in war circles, execution rings, coronation blood oaths. None had frightened him like this moment did. The bond did not arrive as seduction. It arrived as recognition so absolute it felt like standing unarmored before a blade and knowing he would step into it willingly if it meant she lived. He had not felt this pull in centuries because he had carved parts of himself shut to survive betrayal. Yet the walls gave way at first scent, first sight, first breath. And beneath that astonishment lay a colder truth. Her pulse was burning too hot, too fast, spiraling toward catastrophic break. If he claimed her now through ordinary right, the bond would consume her. If he did nothing, it would consume her anyway. He dropped to one knee again, closing the distance carefully, palms visible. You were told it kills by dawn. She gave one brittle nod. It does, he said. Honesty, not comfort. If carried alone. Her laugh broke on pain. Then step back, Your Majesty. Not tonight. He lifted his right hand and held it inches from her chest, waiting. Consent, Vivienne. I cannot force a king's conduit on you. I need your yes. The word stunned her more than the command had. Consent, spoken in a storm courtyard with half a dozen warriors watching, like her will mattered more than optics or fear. The mark flared again, white-hot, and her vision doubled. She understood enough runecraft to know what he was offering. Prohibited transference, royal linework designed for battlefield triage, dangerous even under ritual control. It could tear both wolves open if the channel misaligned. Another spike of pain arced through her ribs and she nearly blacked out. Yes, she whispered. Then stronger. Yes. Do it. His palm settled over her heart. The contact was not gentle, but it was precise. Rune scars ignited up his forearms in molten lines, gold threaded with cold silver. The courtyard lights flickered in answer. Vivienne gasped as the bond current changed direction, part of the burn peeling out of her chest and pouring through his hand like liquid fire drawn through a narrow gate. Relief hit first, sharp and almost dizzying. Then came the echo, his body taking what hers had been drowning in. Theron's shoulders locked. A rough sound tore from him, low and involuntary. He held the channel. Alpha, one guard said, panic cracking his voice. You are overdrawn. Theron bared his teeth without looking away from Vivienne. Hold the line. The transfer deepened. Vivienne felt the thread between them widen from needle to cord, no longer purely agony, now carrying rhythm, breath, fragments of perception that were not her own. Stone under his knee, iron in the rain. The brutal effort it took him not to collapse. She realized with sudden, sick clarity that he was taking more than half. Stop, she said, grabbing his wrist with both shaking hands. That is enough. Not yet. It will break you. Then I will mend. His hand trembled against her sternum. He forced one more draw, then severed the conduit with a sharp exhale and reeled back onto his heel, catching himself on the wet stone before he hit the ground. Color had drained from his face. The runes on his arms dimmed in jagged pulses. For 3 breaths, neither of them moved. The pain in Vivienne's chest had not vanished, but it had changed from a wild inferno to a contained blaze she could track, measure, survive. She could breathe without knives under every inhale. She looked at him and saw the same fire now pacing under his skin, shared, undeniable. Theron rose slowly, unsteady only for an instant, then turned to his guards with a king's flat certainty. She goes to the Eastern Infirmary under my seal. No restraints, no sedation. Any order contrary to mine is treason. He faced Vivienne again, rain softening to a fine silver mist around them as the storm finally began to break. His voice dropped to that private register that had already started to rewrite the shape of her fear. You are not a plague in this territory, he said. You are under my protection. She wanted to argue, to demand why, to reject anything that sounded like debt. Instead, she stared at the hand that had carried her pain and understood a harsher truth. She wanted to trust him, and wanting felt more dangerous than the bond. Theron extended his arm. Can you stand? Vivienne set her palm against his forearm and felt the thread between them hum like a second pulse. If I fall, she said, trying for steel and landing somewhere closer to weary honesty, do not call it grace. A brief, startled warmth touched his expression, gone almost at once. I would call it exhaustion. She let him pull her up. Her knees buckled, his grip tightened, steady and uncompromising. Together they crossed the torchlit threshold into Starfall Stone, while behind them the fortress gates closed against Ironhold rain. The fortress swallowed the storm noise in layers, first the iron groan of the inner gate, then the thud of boots on stone, then the hush of long corridors lit by moonglass sconces. Vivienne expected a holding chamber, expected iron bands and questions sharpened into accusation, expected the old sequence that always began with someone saying, "This is for your own safety," while fastening locks she could not fight through. Theron did not lead her below ground. He took her east, past an arched hall carved with constellations and down a narrow passage that smelled of cedar smoke, rosemary oil, and hot water steeping in copper vats. When they reached a door marked with a silver crescent, two healers moved to flank her. Theron raised his hand once. "She walks in unbound," he said. "Alpha," one healer protested, glancing at the fever-lit sign beneath Vivienne's collarbone. "If the surge returns, she could lash out." "Then we manage the surge," he replied. "Not her dignity." The words landed with enough force that no one argued again. Vivienne crossed the threshold on shaking legs, cataloging details out of habit. 3 cots, 1 writing table, clean bandage stacks arranged by width, a wall niche of dried moon blossom and winter root, no manacles on the bed frames. It did not calm her. It made her suspicious in a new direction, because kindness in political spaces often arrived as camouflage. A healer reached for her wrist to check pulse. Vivienne flinched and nearly lost her footing. Pain knifed under her ribs, hard and abrupt. Theron stepped in, not between them and her, but close enough that she could brace against him without being told to. His hand hovered at her back until she nodded once. Only then did he touch. The room tilted, then steadied. "Sit," he said quietly. "I can stand." "Sit anyway." She sat. The healers worked with swift precision, taking temperature, scent-checking for toxins, mapping the unstable bond sign with a crystal lens that turned the silver web to bright lines across her skin. Every time a wave of fever rolled through her, her shoulders went rigid and her breath shortened. No one restrained her. No one called in guards. Theron remained by the hearth, sleeves pushed to his elbows, runes along his forearms dim but restless, as if listening to a current no one else could hear. At last the eldest healer straightened. "We can blunt the pain with Dreamroot," Vivienne answered first. "No sedatives." The healer frowned. "You need sleep." "I need to wake if the burn spikes." Theron met the healer's gaze. "No Dreamroot." When the room cleared for fresh water and linens, the last guard lingered by the door, eyes fixed on Vivienne with open distrust. Theron did not raise his voice. "Leave us." "Alpha, protocol says, leave us." The guard went. Silence stretched, interrupted only by fire crackle and rain ticking against the narrow window. Vivienne watched Theron as he crossed to the wash basin, dipped a cloth, wrung it out, and knelt in front of her with a king's deliberate care that still felt unreal. He held up the cloth, waiting for permission. She nodded. He pressed cool linen to the back of her neck, then her wrists, where tremors had started again. "I do not understand you," she said, the admission scraped raw by fatigue. "Good," he said. "Understanding can wait. Stabilizing cannot." She almost laughed at that, a small cracked sound. "You had cleaner options in that courtyard. You could have called me Contagion and sent me back over the line with a truce letter." His expression hardened, not at her, at the idea. "I do not return hunted wolves to those who stage the hunt. And if I had been sent to kill you, I would still have carried the surge. Dead spies and dead mates are both useless outcomes." The word mates sat between them, not tender, not triumphant, simply true. Vivian looked away first. I am so tired that certainty feels like another fever. I am sitting in an enemy fortress with my boots gone, my house stripped, my chest full of borrowed fire, and the man who should be most dangerous keeps asking before he touches me. This should be strategy. It should be performance for whatever hearing comes next. But strategy does not warm my hands because they are cold. Performance does not dismiss guards who would report every tremor. I want to map him into categories that kept me alive at Ironhold: tyrant, opportunist, patient predator, yet each gesture refuses the old language. If I trust this, I hand him a blade. If I refuse it, I may bleed out from pride. I do not know which risk is wiser. I only know my body eases when he is near, and that truth frightens me more than pain. A shiver ran through her so hard her teeth clicked. Theron rose, moved to the hearth, and returned with a narrow spool of silver thread and a small bone shuttle etched with crescent runes. "Hold out your right hand," he said. She hesitated. "What is that?" "A ward thread. It anchors dreamfall and dulls night terrors during bond fever." "Who taught you?" "My mother, before she died. She tied one on every soldier after winter raids." He paused, then added, "I have not braided one in years." Vivian offered her hand. His fingers were warm, roughened at the pads from sword grips and old ritual cuts. He looped the thread around her wrist with precise tension, knotting in a pattern she recognized from archival sketches, but had never seen practiced. 3 turns, 1 cross-binding, a final seal pressed by thumb to pulse point. The silver glimmered once, then settled against her skin like moonlight caught in cloth. "Will it keep the bond from tearing open again?" she asked. "No. It will remind your body you are not alone in it." Something in her throat tightened. When the next fever wave struck, it struck harder. The sign under her collarbone flared white silver and the old scars near her shoulder shook with involuntary muscle pulls. Vivian bent forward, gripping cot frame, vision narrowing to sparks. Theron moved behind her, one hand braced at her sternum, not drawing pain this time, only giving her a point to breathe against. "In through the nose," he murmured. "Count 4, hold 2. Out slow." She obeyed because the alternative was drowning. The spasms eased to tremors. Theron shifted to the writing table, opened a cracked leather volume, and began to read in a voice low enough to keep the room from becoming a spectacle. The text was old, lunar law, pre-Crown reform, dense with archaic phrasing and medicinal annotations. He skipped the punitive sections, lingered on passages about reciprocal load-bearing, consent rights, and paired breathing sequences used before conduit transfer. "You read healer script," she said when she could speak again. "I read what keeps my people alive. You are an Alpha King. That does not exempt me from study." He turned a page. "Do you want silence?" "No." She surprised herself with the speed of it. "Keep reading." He did. Hours thinned into something quieter than peace, but kinder than fear. By late afternoon, the rain had reduced to mist, and gray light pooled across the floor in long bands. Vivian drifted in and out, jerking awake each time she expected restraints that never came. Every time, Theron was still there, sometimes at the table marking notes for the healers, sometimes by the hearth-warming water, once standing at the window with his head bowed as if listening to distant voices carried through stone. When dusk bled blue across the infirmary walls, he closed the lunar text and looked at his own hands for a long moment before speaking. "I avoided touch for 12 years, he said. "After the last betrayal, every bond contact felt like a doorway left open for a knife. I trained myself to stand near without contact, command without comfort." He lifted his gaze to hers. "You are the first person I have touched this long by choice." Vivian stared at him, pulse unsteady for reasons the fever did not explain. "Why tell me?" Because you keep waiting for the cost. You should know the restraint is not indifference. It is fear. Mine, not yours. He stood. Sleep. The ward thread will hold through first moonrise. I will return before council. Council. They demanded one as soon as Ironhold's truce banner was sighted. His mouth set into a hard line. They will test you. They will test me through you. She swallowed. Then I should stand. You should heal enough to choose how you stand. He moved toward the door, then paused. No one enters without your permission unless your pulse crashes. That order is already sealed. After he left, Vivienne lay back against clean linen and watched the silver thread at her wrist catch firelight in small, steady flashes. She slept with one hand curled over the ward knot and woke only once from a nightmare she could not fully remember, except that in the dream, she had been voiceless, and in this room, now, she was not. By the next morning, the fever had not vanished, but it had rhythm. That alone felt like a miracle she distrusted. The council chamber sat high in the central keep, a circular room of black stone and suspended lanterns, with pack crests carved into the floor around a central ring of pale granite used for oath disputes. Vivienne entered beside Theron, not behind him. Whispers followed her like brushfire. Some counselors masked it, some did not. Elder Sorel, narrow-faced and silver-haired, spoke first. Your Majesty, bringing an Ironhold exile into our core, keep during bond instability violates containment law. We request immediate transfer to border quarantine pending blood review. Vivienne kept her shoulders level. I am here. You can address me directly. Sorel's eyes slid to her, dismissive. You are here by royal indulgence. Theron's reply was quiet. She is here by my oath. A younger counselor rose, scent sharp with agitation. With respect, Alpha, a death mark rumor is enough to fracture subordinate packs. If she collapses during a surge, panic spreads. We cannot anchor policy to one woman's exceptional treatment. Vivienne opened her mouth, but another voice cut in from the rear benches. Captain Bran, commander of Inner Gate Watches, stepped forward with a sneer he did not bother hiding. Exceptional, he said. That is generous. We all saw her carried in half-conscious from enemy land. How long before Ironhold whistles and she runs back with our maps in her pocket? A few wolves shifted, uneasy. Others nodded. The old reflex rose in Vivienne, that trained stillness that had once kept blows from escalating. Do not react. Do not feed their story. But silence here would be read as guilt, and she was so tired of letting men write her shape for her. I crossed your border with no maps and no escort, she said. I crossed because my own pack tried to kill me after forging medical testimony in my name. If you doubt that, request the seals from Ironhold archives and compare script pressure and wax depth. Counterfeits leave patterns. So do cowards. Bran gave a mocking half-bow and started down from his tier. Bold for a guest. He reached toward her shoulder as if to steer her backward out of the ring. Theron moved one step. Power hit the room like thunder dropped inside stone. His alpha aura did not flare wild. It descended with surgical force, a crushing pressure that drove every standing wolf to one knee in a single stunned beat. Lantern flames snapped lower. The air thickened until breathing took effort. Bran froze with his hand inches from Vivienne, then buckled hard, palms striking granite. No one, Theron said, each word edged with iron law, touches her without consent. He did not stand in front of her. He stood beside her, shoulder aligned to shoulder, making the point plain to every witness. Rise if you can hold respect, he continued. Kneel if you cannot. Most remained kneeling. Elder Sorel bowed his head, voice strained under the aura's weight. Alpha King, Council sought only risk control. Then control the correct risk, Theron said. The risk is not Vivienne Ironhold. The risk is ignorance weaponized into policy. He turned slightly, enough that his voice carried to the outer ring where guards and scribes watched with wide eyes. Record this under crown seal. Vivian Ironhold is under royal protection by oath name. Any challenge to her person, status, or lawful treatment will be judged as treason against the Starfall crown. A stunned silence followed, then the quick scratch of 3 scribes writing at once. Bran, still on his knees, stared at the floor. My Alpha, I meant no treason. Theron's gaze hardened. You meant disrespect in my house. You will spend 7 nights on Outer Watch without rank privilege and submit formal apology to High Healer Mara for violating infirmary protocol with your rhetoric. If you fail, I strip your captaincy. Bran bowed lower. I accept. The aura lifted in careful increments, releasing the chamber without chaos. Wolves stood slowly, avoiding Vivienne's eyes, recalibrating in real time to a hierarchy that had just shifted around her. Elder Sorel cleared his throat. If she remains, we require safeguards. Vivienne answered before Theron could. You will have them. Open your right records and I will annotate every bond illness protocol that uses coercion or sedation without consent. Then we rewrite them with your healers present, under audit. If you want stability, build it from truth, not fear. Sorel blinked, caught off guard by the offer. You would do that. I already started in Ironhold, they buried it. You can choose better. For the first time, several council wolves looked at her as if seeing more than scandal. Theron watched her from the corner of his eye, and that quiet regard held something warmer than approval, something like relief. The session ended without a vote for her exile. As the chamber emptied, Vivienne's legs trembled from delayed shock. Theron noticed and slowed his stride to match hers, neither hovering nor pretending not to see. You were ruthless, he said softly. So were you. Did I overreach? She thought of Bran's hand in the air, of the sudden kneeling ring, of Theron choosing to stand at her side where anyone could read the gesture as partnership instead of possession. No, she said. You drew a boundary and held it. They reached the corridor arch where morning light poured across the stone in pale gold bars. Vivienne paused, fingers brushing the silver ward thread still tied at her wrist. I am not ready to trust easily, she said, but I am done mistaking cruelty for strength. Theron inclined his head, solemn as vow. That is enough for today. For the first time since her wedding night, she believed tomorrow might be something she could meet without armor. A horn sounded from the outer wall, one long note cut short, and the guards in the corridor shifted from routine alertness to battle stillness. Theron's head turned toward the sound. Vivienne felt the bond answer with a sharp pulse under her ribs. Not pain yet, only warning. Captain Ilya rounded the corner at speed, dropped to one knee and held out a sealed strip of dark cloth. Ironhold truce banner at the south gate, she said. Envoy requests immediate audience under moon law. Theron took the strip, thumbed the wax, and his expression went flat. Name. Ilya swallowed. Corvus Ashford. The corridor seemed to narrow around Vivienne. The cedar smoke, the warm stone, even the pale bars of daylight at the arch all thinned beneath a memory she had spent years trying to file into manageable pieces. Corvus leaning over her desk in the old archive tower, asking careful questions about transference theory, promising he would protect the work from council politics. 3 weeks later, her notes had surfaced in rival hands, stripped of attribution and altered into weapon plans. The outpost massacre that followed had been pinned on her in a closed hearing she was not permitted to attend. Theron looked at her first, not the captain. Do you want to see him? She held his gaze until the shaking in her hands settled enough to be hidden. If I hide, he writes the story for me again. Then he sees you standing. Theron turned to Ilya. Escort to the lower audience hall, full witness circle. No private passage, no closed doors, No armed steps inside the ring beyond Crown Guard. Ilya struck fist to chest and left. They walked in silence through descending corridors carved with old constellations, the bond between them a taut line, carrying too much information and not enough comfort. Vivienne could feel Theron's anger held under discipline, measured and deliberate. He could likely feel the jagged edge of her dread and the older shame threaded through it. Shame not because she had done wrong, but because public betrayal taught the body to brace for repeat harm, no matter how many times the mind named it unjust. The lower audience hall had no throne. That was deliberate. Starfall held truce hearings at floor level so status could not hide deceit. Black stone rose in clean arcs, moonlight filtered through high slits, and a pale granite ring marked oath ground at the center. Corvus stood just outside it in travel leathers lined with rain-dark fur, his posture humble, his face composed into cousinly sorrow. Two Ironhold witnesses flanked him, both old enough to look like caution rather than threat. When his eyes found Vivienne, a flicker of satisfaction moved and vanished so quickly most would miss it. She did not. He bowed first to Theron. Alpha King, I came in peace. Theron did not return the bow. State purpose. Corvus folded his hands. Concern for both territories. Rumors spread faster than patrols. A destabilized bond tied to a former Ironhold Luna candidate has entered your court. My council fears contagion panic, succession challenges, and retaliatory strikes if this is mishandled. He let the words settle, then turned his head toward Vivienne as if inviting reconciliation. I asked for this audience to prevent bloodshed. Vivienne laughed once without warmth. You arranged archers on my exile route. An accusation made under stress. Corvus's tone stayed smooth. I signed no such order. Wren will testify? Will he? Corvus said softly. If speaking costs him his post and his family's winter rations. Theron stepped into the granite ring. The room's temperature seemed to drop with him. You are in my keep. You do not threaten witnesses. Corvus raised both palms. No threat. A practical observation. He reached into his satchel slowly and produced a narrow iron case, opening it to reveal folded letters stamped with starfall wax. Since we are discussing practicality, I bring these as proof that external actors are already exploiting this situation. Anonymous copies arrived at Ironhold gates, allegedly from Starfall officers. They claim Your Majesty took Vivienne as political breeding stock and plans to discard her once an heir is secured. A murmur moved around the witness benches. Vivienne did not look at the papers. She looked at Theron's face and found no guilt there, only a cold attention that suggested he was already mapping forgery vectors and courier routes. Corvus continued, voice gaining solemn cadence. I do not believe every letter I receive, but public doubt is corrosive. Therefore, I request a moon tribunal, open and witnessed, at the Temple Circle tomorrow night. Let the bond be tested under law. If she is stable, I will sign public retraction and submit penalty if my claims fail. If she is not, we contain a regional threat before it becomes catastrophe. The proposal was elegant because refusal looked like fear. Acceptance looked like compliance with his stage. Vivienne stepped into the ring opposite him. You want a ritual death with spectators. Corvus angled his head. I want clarity. You want my blood in a legal bowl. I want both packs alive. She held his gaze and saw the old pattern, his talent for wearing civic language while arranging private ruin. Tell them about the outpost, Corvus. Tell them who sold my healing notes. His jaw tightened for the first time. You were censured. The record stands. Because you authored the record. Theron spoke before the exchange could fray into shouting. The tribunal request is noted. I will answer at sundown. He looked to his scribes. These letters go to seal analysis, ink dating, and courier trace. Immediate. Corvus smiled faintly. Of course. Transparency benefits everyone. As guards moved to escort the Ironhold party to truce quarters, Corvus passed near Vivienne and lowered his voice to a thread only she could catch. You always wanted your work seen. Tomorrow, all eyes on you. She did not step back. Tomorrow, all lies under moonlight. His smile sharpened and disappeared as he walked on. By the time dusk pressed blue against the keep windows, 3 additional copies of the forged letters had appeared in kitchens, barracks, and council antechambers, each with slight wording changes calibrated to inflame a different fear. Vivienne sat at the infirmary table with a magnifier lens, comparing wax fractures and script pressure while Theron stood at the hearth dictating dispatches. To Healer Tamsin at the Eastern Border Hospice, he said to the scribe, request confirmation of signature records from last harvest through present. Urgent crown seal. He shifted to another strip. To Outer Gate Watch Ledger, produce full list of unscheduled couriers entering within 10 days. Include payment marks. When the scribe departed, quiet settled. Firelight climbed the planes of Theron's face, roughening the old scars at his forearms. Vivienne set down the lens. He seeded this before he crossed the border, she said. The letters were in motion while I was still in fever. Theron nodded. Multi-point rumor pressure. If 1 copy is disproved, 5 more survive long enough to damage trust. Do you have to grant the tribunal? If I deny open testing, neutral pacts treat it as admission. Corvus then requests emergency arbitration from the Mountain Conclave. That invites outside enforcement into Starfall territory. His mouth thinned. He designed this as a no-clean option framework. The bond thrummed between them, steady but restless. Vivienne rose, crossed to the window slit, and pressed her palm to cold stone. Below, torch lines marked patrol routes in geometric precision. Safety had shape here. So did siege. He used my own field against me, she said. Transference, consent law, ritual thresholds. He stole the language and sharpened it. Theron came to stand beside her, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. Then we take it back. She turned to answer and caught the scent of him, cedar and storm and the metallic trace of conduit runes still healing from the courtyard draw. Attraction moved through her with disorienting force, not soft, not convenient, a recognition that had teeth and reverence at once. Fear rose beside it, an older reflex insisting that need made women negotiable. I want to step into him, and I want to run from that wanting. Both are true. The bond does not ask what history taught me about men with power, and my body does not consult legal precedent when he stands this close. If I misread him, I lose more than pride. If I keep mistrusting every offered hand, Corvus wins without lifting a blade. This is the trade I hate most: vulnerability as strategy, tenderness as risk. Still, the line is already there between us, bright and unarguable, and pretending otherwise has not made me safer. Theron lifted his hand, paused. May I? She gave one careful nod. His fingers touched the ward thread at her wrist, then slid to rest lightly over her pulse. The bond answered with a clean hum rather than a burn. We train now, he said. If Corvus tries to force a surge in the circle, you need independent control. I will not carry the full load again unless you ask. They practiced seated on the floor facing each other, knees almost touching, palms aligned without full contact. Breath cycles first. Then microconduit work through consent cues. 3 taps to open, 1 to close. No transfer beyond agreed threshold. Twice, Vivienne lost rhythm when memory intruded. Twice, Theron waited without pushing until she found the count again. At second bell, Healer Mara entered with ink-stained fingers and a grim set to her jaw. Letter analysis complete, she said. All 6 are forged. Wax composition includes ash resin used in Ironhold ceremonial stores, not Starfall. Ink carries obsidian dust traces. Uncommon. Vivian went still. Obsidian dust. Mara nodded. Fine particulate ritual grade. Theron's gaze sharpened. Used in what? Binding relic housings. Old bloodline keys, mostly outlawed. The room cooled despite the fire. Corvus had not come with paper tricks alone. Mara set a second document on the table. Council pressure is rising. Elder Sorel recommends postponing the tribunal 2 weeks. Too late, Theron said. Delay reads as weakness now. Mara looked between them. Then survive tomorrow night. She left them with the fire snapping too loud in the silence. The strike began at moonrise rehearsal. Not in the temple, but in the keep's inner practice ring where tribunal participants were required to register scent and oath signatures before public rite. Vivienne stood inside a chalked circle with Mara and 2 scribes while Theron watched from the perimeter, arms folded, expression unreadable. Corvus entered under guard with polished calm and submitted his name for record. The officiant, an old neutral judge from the Valley Pax, recited procedure. No weapons, no unregistered artifacts, no touching between petitioning parties without explicit consent. Corvus spread his hands to show compliance. His sleeves fell back, revealing bare wrists. Vivian felt the wrongness a heartbeat later, a low metallic vibration beneath the floor, as if a chain were being dragged through stone somewhere just out of sight. The bond at her chest tightened. She turned toward Theron. His pupils narrowed, predator surfacing. Stop the register, he said. Corvus moved then, fast and precise. He struck the heel of his hand against the iron cuff at his own belt. A black length of linked obsidian snapped free like a live thing and bit into the chalk circle. Runes flaring dark silver as they drank the line. The vibration became a scream in Vivienne's bones. Pain detonated through her sternum. She dropped to one knee, palm slamming stone, breath shredded. The bond burn surged past anything from the courtyard, not random this time but directed, hooked, yanked toward the relic like water forced through broken gates. Around her, lanterns guttered. One scribe fainted. The other staggered back shouting for ward guards. Theron crossed the perimeter in 2 strides, hit the chalk edge, and hissed as the chain's backlash struck him through the bond. He did not stop. He caught her shoulder without engaging the heartline conduit. Vivienne. Emergency stabilization only, not full transfer. Do you consent? Yes, she gasped, and struck 3 rapid taps against his wrist. He braced behind Vivienne, one arm around her ribs to keep her upright, the other hand locking over her heartline to intercept the surge. No, she gasped. Not all of it. I know. Corvus stood outside the circle, face lit by the relic's cruel sheen. Witnesses present, he called to the judge over the chaos. Record this instability. Under Moon Law, emergency escalation to full tribunal is mandatory. The judge, pale and shaking, nodded because law was law, and panic loved procedure. Theron's runes ignited up both arms, brighter than Vivienne had seen, and the smell of scorched air filled the ring. He was taking too much again, forced by timing, by crowd, by a trap built from technical knowledge only someone with her stolen research should possess. Vivienne clawed for focus through the roaring in her skull. The obsidian links were keyed to Ironhold bloodline signatures. Keyed to her. Keyed to pull until something broke. When she looked up, Corvus was already smiling at the record scribes as if the outcome were decided. The chain drank another pulse, the burn spiked, and Theron's knees hit stone beside her with a sound that turned the world suddenly, terribly critical. Theron's knees struck stone, and the sound cut through Vivienne more cleanly than the pain did. Corvus had engineered exactly this angle. Force a public surge, compel the Alpha King to absorb it, and let honor finish what poison could not. The tribunal judge was already calling for relocation to the Temple Circle under emergency moon law, voice shaking but procedural, while guards shouted over one another and healers scrambled to keep the scribes conscious. Through it all, Corvus stood just outside the ruined chalk line with that measured, civic expression, as though he were preserving order rather than detonating it. The obsidian chain throbbed against the floor, each link drinking from her bloodline key and returning the current as a jagged burn through the mate thread. Vivian could feel Theron's restraint turning brittle beside her. He had promised not to take it all. His body was taking it anyway, because her pulse was spiking and the relic was amplifying every fluctuation. "Judge!" Corvus called, projecting toward the witness benches. "Record uncontrolled bond collapse. Under Clause 7, containment by dominant counterpart is authorized." Vivian forced air into her lungs. "You forged Clause 7. Corvus tilted his head. "I amended precedent. You should be flattered your work inspired legal evolution." Theron's hand tightened over her heart line. His voice came rough but controlled. "Do not answer him. Breathe." The chain pulsed again. Heat tore up her sternum and snapped behind her eyes. For a fractured second she saw double, the practice ring and, overlaid on it, the old archive tower where Corvus had stolen her notes with gentle hands and careful questions. Shame and rage arrived together, old companions she had mistaken for fate. She tasted copper, swallowed it, and planted her palm harder against the stone until the tremor in her arm steadied. "I need the full circle now," she said to the judge. "Not relocation. Here, witnesses stay." The judge stared at the cracked chalk and the active relic. "This chamber is compromised." "Exactly," Vivienne said. "He prepared it. If he gets the temple floor, he resets the geometry and hides the mechanism." Corvus gave a soft, disappointed exhale. "Paranoia in active fever. Tragic." Theron lifted his head, amber gone feral at the edges. "She speaks. You listen." Silence dropped in layers. Even panicked guards obeyed that tone. Vivienne turned to the witnesses, making her voice carry despite the fire in her ribs. "Look at the chain housing on his belt, inner slot, left side, obsidian dust residue, ritual grade. He entered a no artifact register already armed." She dragged in another breath. "Captain Ilya, seize the belt case and log it under Crown Seal." Ilya moved at once with 2 crown guards. Corvus stepped back. Too late. The case came free under witness eyes, black powder staining the captain's gloves. One of the neutral scribes, still pale, pushed upright and croaked, "Logged. Unauthorized relic housing confirmed." The first crack in Corvus's composure was tiny, but Vivian saw it. The judge's moonstaff struck stone, and the emergency decree rolled out in clipped commands. Guards hauled the practice rails inward and reset them as tribunal boundaries, while runners dragged benches from the side aisles. Council members, healers, Crown Guard, Neutral Valley delegates, and both Ironhold witnesses who had arrived under truce filed in under shouted oath calls and took their places as scribes reopened record slates. No torches were relit. Moonlight through the high slits painted the stone in cold bars while the broken chalk circle was reforged in salt and silver around the active chain. Theron remained inside with Vivienne, one knee still down, breath slower than it should have been. He was bleeding power through his runes in controlled increments, buying her time at a cost she could feel reverberating in her own bones. Corvus stood at the perimeter rail, hands clasped as if in prayer. The judge raised the moonstaff. "Emergency Moon Tribunal is in session. Petitioning claimant Corvus Ashford alleges lethal instability in subject bond and requests containment authority by bloodline proxy." Vivian laughed once, harsh and clear. "Bloodline proxy is not a legal role." Corvus answered smoothly. "In unresolved succession events, it is." Theron spoke without rising. "You have no succession claim in Starfall." "Not yet," Corvus said. There it was, naked enough for everyone to hear. The chain surged. Theron flinched. The bond between him and Vivian snapped tight as wire. She felt the concealed transfer beginning again, his body pulling the burn before she could consent because instinct had overridden his oath. He was trying to hide the magnitude of it from the room, jaw locked, shoulders rigid. If she let him continue, Corvus would get his martyr and his chaos both. This was the crux, and she saw it with sudden brutal clarity. Corvus's weapon only worked if shame kept her passive, and love kept Theron self-sacrificing. He had built his victory on both of them choosing old habits. Vivian rose on shaking legs and stepped out of Theron's supporting arm. His hand caught air. "Vivian. No more carrying me alone," she said, low enough for him and loud enough for the benches. She walked to the center sigil inside the circle where moonlight was strongest. Every eye tracked her. The burn climbed, vicious and bright, yet her fear no longer felt like collapse. It felt like direction. "I am done disappearing to make cruel men comfortable. I am done presenting my pain as evidence against my own worth." My research was never about domination. It was about consent, shared burden, and survival without erasure. He stole the language and sharpened it into a knife. "I can still choose what the blade cuts. If I speak now and fail, I fail as myself. Scene. If I stay silent, he drafts my ending and calls it law. I would rather break in the center of this ring than live one more year as a rumor authored by him." She drew a ritual knife from the judge's offered tray, met the judge's gaze, and waited for the nod. Then she cut her palm in one clean line and let 3 drops strike the stone. "Under moon law and blood law," she said, voice ringing against the vault, "I invoke Ironhold transference gift by original doctrine. No transfer without consent, no extraction without reciprocity, no verdict without direct witness." A few elders gasped. One of the Ironhold witnesses blanched and whispered, "That doctrine was sealed." "By forgers," Vivian answered. She turned slowly, forcing every section of the chamber to meet her eyes. "You will all look at me. Not at him, not at his documents. At me. I name Corvus Ashford Oathbreaker, research thief, and architect of false testimony. I call trial by truth." The judge slammed the moonstaff once. Trial by truth invoked and witnessed. Interruption forfeits rank. Corvus's calm finally thinned. "Objection. She is compromised." "Denied," said the judge. "Compromise is the matter at issue." Vivian pressed her bleeding palm to the central stone and reached through the bond with deliberate control, not to Theron first, but to the chain key itself. The pattern revealed under her mind like a map she had once drawn. Siphon line, amplification loop, inheritance trigger keyed to her blood signature and routed through Corvus's crest markers. He had braided her stolen equations with outlawed runes and called it governance. "Theron," she said, eyes still on Corvus. 3 taps, half load only. He obeyed instantly. Tap, tap, tap at her wrist through the bond. Consent opened the conduit. The next surge hit, and this time she did not yield at all. She took half into her own core, anchored it with breath count and ward thread cadence, then released the remainder into the paired channel Theron held. Pain lanced through both of them, fierce enough to blur edges, but the pattern stabilized instead of spiraling. The chamber felt it. Wolves along the benches straightened as the air pressure normalized. Theron got to his feet beside the perimeter, pale but upright. Pride and fear moved across his face in the same breath. Corvus's voice sharpened. "You are burning yourself to perform." "I am rewiring your trap," Vivian said. She shifted the conduit again, feeding the chain not raw bonfire but reflected rune signatures pulled from the belt case evidence. Stolen runes recognized their own architecture and began to resonate backward through the obsidian links. Hairline fractures spidered along the metal. The sound was high and crystalline, like winter ice under strain. Corvus lunged. He vaulted the rail with the chain in his hand, aiming to hook her throat and force a terminal draw. Vivian pivoted into him, caught the lynx barehanded, and ignored the searing bite against her palm long enough to twist the chain around her forearm and slam the free end onto the inner sigil. Silver fire raced down the runes she had just inverted. "Perimeter!" Theron roared. Crown guards locked the circle edge. Theron held the north point himself, aura dropping hard enough to freeze every non-essential body in place. Corvus yanked against the chain. It did not come free. The inverted runes cinched around his wrists and ankles instead, dragging him to one knee inside the very ring he had tuned for her execution. His false crest blazed under his collar, then charred in jagged lines and peeled away as ash. He stared up at her, fury stripping the polish from his face. "You were always meant to break." Vivienne stepped close, breathing hard, blood on her hand, moonlight on her jaw. "I did break, and I learned what cannot be owned." She turned to the judge. Binding verdict. Fraud by forged testimony, unlawful relic deployment, attempted murder by coercive extraction, treason through succession manipulation. The judge lifted the staff. Confirmed by witness and evidence. Theron's voice carried through the stunned hall, iron and final. "By blood law and moon law, you are stripped, exiled, and forgotten." Corvus thrashed once against the binding, then stilled when the chain cracked down its center with a dry report and collapsed into black ash across the stone. Without the relic, his borrowed markers guttered out. He looked smaller immediately, not harmless, but reduced to the man beneath the theater. Captain Ilya entered the circle with 2 guards in iron cuffs marked for oath criminals. She fastened them on Corvus without ceremony. He did not look at Theron again. He looked only at Vivienne, as if still searching for the obedient silence he had cultivated for years and could no longer find. By the time moonlight shifted to the far side of the slits, Corvus Ashford was marched from the practice hall under full witness record, rankless, crestless, and bound for border exile in iron silence. Behind him, scribes read the annulments aloud, the forged healer testimonies voided, the false starfall letters entered as criminal fabrications, the sealed censure against Vivienne's research vacated pending full restoration review. One final witness stepped forward before adjournment, voice shaking but clear. Wren, the young guard from Ironhold, bowed to the judge. "I confirm the archers were ordered by Ashford after exile decree." The hall absorbed that statement like a struck bell. Vivienne remained in the center ring until the last word was recorded, blood drying on her palm, bond humming raw but steady under her ribs. Theron crossed to her only when the judge lowered the staff and declared the tribunal closed. He did not touch her immediately. He stood close, breathing with her, matching count for count. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. She looked at the ash where the chain had been, then at the chamber doors where Corvus had disappeared, and finally at the hand Theron now offered, open and waiting. "Yes," she said, and took it. His grip closed, warm and steady, and he led her from the tribunal ring through corridors washed in moonlight and quiet. No one stopped them. Guards at each arch bowed and looked away with deliberate respect, as if the keep itself understood that whatever came next belonged to no counsel and no law clerk. Vivienne still felt the echo of the chain in her palm, a phantom burn where obsidian had bitten skin, but the bond no longer tore. It waited. Theron guided her down the narrow stair beneath the eastern wing to the old sanctum where Starfall kings once swore war oaths. The chamber was circular, built from pale stone shot through with silver veins that caught the moon and sent it moving across the floor like living water. This was where her fever had first steadied. This was where he had chosen her life over strategy. The air smelled of rain-cooled rock, cedar oil, and the faint sweetness of moon blossom from a niche of old offerings. He released her hand only when they reached the center seal. "Vivienne." She lifted her chin. His voice had gone rough, careful. "I will ask plainly." He held her gaze. "Do you want this claiming tonight?" She let the question settle, felt the space he gave her, the absence of pressure. Her body ached, her palms stung, and beneath that fatigue a low thrum built in her chest, not hunger, not fear, something older and clearer. Yes. He nodded once but did not move yet. May I touch your throat? Yes. His fingertips brushed the side of her neck, barely there, then rested with reverence at her pulse. The contact sent a clean shiver through her, and the bond answered with a soft hum that spread from sternum to spine. He watched her face for any flinch, any hesitation. May I touch your jaw? Yes. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, calloused and gentle at once, and she breathed in cedar and storm and the last trace of ritual fire. The knot behind her ribs loosened another degree. May I touch your pulse line? Yes, Theron. At her collar, where neck met shoulder, his hand settled and stayed. Amber bled into his irises, predator and devotion braided so tightly she could not separate them. He leaned in until his forehead touched hers. For a moment they only breathed, count for count, the way they had practiced on the infirmary floor. Tell me to stop at any point, he whispered. I will. She slid her fingers into the front of his tunic and held on. Do not hold back because you fear me breaking. I fear only taking what is not freely given. It is freely given. He turned his head, mouth grazing skin first, a warm drag that made her knees soften. Then his fangs found the shoulder curve in one deliberate, controlled bite. Pain flashed sharp and bright. She sucked in air through her teeth and clutched his collar, and the pain changed almost immediately, not vanishing, transforming into a spreading heat that moved through her like dawn through winter branches. The old burn that had haunted her for days unraveled under it, strand by strand, until what remained was pressure, then rhythm, then breath, shared across two bodies. The bond opened. It did not crash this time. It flowed. She felt his memories brush hers in fragments. A boy king standing alone before a hostile council, the weight of command worn like armor, the long, cold years after betrayal when touch had meant danger. In return, she felt her own history move through the thread toward him. Archive dust on late nights, careful notes hidden under floorboards, the bridal chamber humiliation, the border reign, the stubborn refusal to disappear. None of it was filtered or prettied. He took all of it and did not turn away. He lifted his mouth from her shoulder, breath unsteady. A thin line of blood welled and then sealed with a shimmer of gold-silver light. The mark settled against her skin like a living sigil. His forehead rested to hers again. Mine, he said, not as possession, as vow. She cupped his face with her uninjured hand, fierce and tender in the same motion. Yours. The word rose between them like truth, finding its name. Mate, he whispered. Mate, she answered. Then she pushed him back a half step, enough to look at him fully. My turn. A startled, hungry warmth crossed his face. He gave one solemn nod and opened his collar without ceremony, exposing the heart line where the conduit runes crossed his chest. Consent given. Vivian leaned in and set her mouth first over the pulse beneath his collarbone, a promise before the claim. Then she bit over his heart line, controlled and certain. He went rigid, a rough breath breaking from him as the mark took. Power rippled outward in visible strands, gold from him, silver from her, twisting together in braided arcs that circled them once and then sank into skin and stone alike. The sanctum sigils lit under their feet and faded to a steady glow. When she released him, his new mark shone briefly before settling into the same paired pattern as hers. The one-sided burden was gone. She could feel it with healer precision. No forced draw, no hidden siphon, no fatal surge waiting in the dark. Two channels, shared load. consent anchored at the core. She pressed her brow to his chest and laughed, shaky with relief. No more carrying me alone. His arms came around her, strong enough to hold, careful enough to heal. No more leaving you alone. They stood that way until her breathing evened and the bond hummed quiet and settled between them, like shared breath at rest. 3 nights later, under a full moon bright enough to silver the border stones, both packs gathered at the crossing where Vivian had once arrived in torn wedding linen. The rebuilt hall stood behind them, half ironhold granite, half starfall basalt, its central arch carved with the new covenant sigil, twin marks interlocked, gold and silver. The proceedings were not theater, they were record. Judge Halwyn presided with the same moonstaff from the emergency tribunal. He called evidence first. Captain Ilya presented the seized belt case, logged and sealed. Healer Mara submitted the chain ash analysis, confirming outlawed relic composition and bloodline key runes. Archive clerks read the seal report proving all 6 letters forged with ironhold ash resin and obsidian dust. A courier ledger identified the paid carriers Corvus had used before crossing truce lines. Healer Tamsin's sworn reply arrived under crown seal and was read aloud in full, confirming her name had been forged on the original Deathmark testimony. Wren testified to the Archer's order and, voice shaking, admitted that he and a second guard had loosed wide on purpose so Vivian could run west. The second guard's name, Tomas, was entered into sanctuary rolls beside his. Elder Sorel stepped forward next and bowed to Vivian without prompting. The council's containment motion is withdrawn and struck from Starfall precedent. Captain Bran, 7 nights leaner from Outer Watch, delivered a formal apology to Vivienne and to Healer Mara in front of both packs, then surrendered his captain insignia until retraining was completed. In Ironhold ranks, Elder Marrow's title had been suspended by survivor vote pending criminal review for accepting forged testimony. Cassian Vale's sworn deposition, read by a neutral scribe, admitted he had accepted Corvus's claim without bond examination and relinquished any succession standing. No one defended him. Then the accord itself was signed. Theron signed as Alpha King. Vivienne signed as High Luna by sovereign appointment and legal authorship, her reforms etched into law, no exile by rumor, no bond treatment without consent, criminal penalties for bloodline fraud, and open sanctuary for rejected wolves from either territory. Halwyn sealed it. The packs knelt, then rose together. At moon zenith, Theron took her hand and turned her toward the assembly. No throne separated them. No one stood behind her to speak for her. She spoke her own vow, clear enough for the outer ranks to hear. I was cast out under a false mark. I stand claimed under true law. I will not build this realm on silence again. Theron's vow followed, simple and iron true. I recognize Vivian Ironhold Starfall as my mate, my equal in rule, and the heart of this covenant. When they kissed, it was brief and reverent, and the crowd's answering howl rolled across the valley like weather changing. Near dawn, they crossed the threshold of their new home at the border ridge, the same line where exile had once begun. The hearth was lit. 2 desks faced the eastern window, one stacked with treaty drafts, one with healer ledgers. Vivienne set her palm over her mark, then over his, and felt the bond answer in calm, steady pulses. Tomorrow we review sanctuary petitions, she said, toeing off her boots. After breakfast, he replied, and there was a smile in his voice. She leaned into him, warm and exhausted and wholly unafraid. After breakfast. Then we plan the nursery wing you insisted was practical architecture. It is practical. It is also hopeful. He kissed her temple. Good. Outside, first light touched the border stones. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, they began the life they had fought to make, where her worth was no longer argued, only lived.